Okay, welcome everyone again. Thank you for joining us for the final virtual dialogue series for enabling resilience and scaling up action on climate change adaptation. Our session today is called Resilience of the People and Communities. How far have we come? How should we build a road ahead? I'm Kavya and I will be your technical facilitator today. Please use the Q&A function for your questions where you can also upvote others' questions. Please add your name, organization affiliation, and country to your question so that we can address you properly. A warm welcome to everyone. Again, I will now pass the floor to Rohini Kohli, Lead Technical Specialist, National Adaptation Plan, Global Support Program. Off to you, Rohini.
Thank you very much, Kavya, and and thank you for the warm welcome from my side as well. A warm welcome to all who are joining or have already joined the webinar. So the title of the webinar is "How far have we come? How should we build the road ahead?" And this is within the work stream of building resilience of people and communities. This session inaugurates the discussion about thinking about this work stream. In fact, we are likely to raise more questions than answers at this stage. We hope this discussion provides a fertile moment to collectively think about some of the themes that should be covered for this work stream for the forum in March, which will be held in March 2021. Now, zooming out, what's of relevance to this work stream? Let's consider that more than 2/3 of the first cycle of NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, which were submitted after the Paris Agreement was signed, include adaptation. They covered sectors such as agriculture, water, disaster risk reduction, climate risks. They covered financing issues. In this cycle, UNDP is supporting 100 plus countries on enhancing their NDCs in complementarity with the NDC partnership. I think we can safely say now that adaptation overall has become front and center of raising ambition on climate action within the NDCs. So it's not purely a mitigation discussion alone. And there is also a stronger alignment with the national adaptation plans. But the key question here is, what is the role of communities and how can locally led adaptation be nurtured through these NDCs? We hope they will not remain top-down exercises, but will actually enable and put resources in the hands of local people in order to really scale up climate action. Secondly, the COVID-19 crisis has brought with it impacts to people and to communities. It stretched our health and economic systems. This crisis is still unfolding. From our side, UNDP's response has been to support socioeconomic assessments and what we call the 2.0 COVID offer, which is focused on green economy, digital transformation, governance, and social protection. And partnerships are key. But I think there's a larger question for UNDP and also for all adaptation practitioners, in fact, for the adaptation community itself. How are we going to integrate these investments for the green recovery in terms of adaptation, because local resilience building generates jobs, livelihoods that can contribute to the green recovery. But these aspects are not well integrated into our global and regional thinking as of now. And we need to think about at large about this question. The Asia Pacific is like a laboratory of adaptation. I mean, is there something or other experiences here that can really help this whole green recovery stimulus that is already being rolled out and will go ahead? So these are some of the larger. Now zooming in for this forum, for this particular work stream and this particular session, we are going to look specifically at how research and knowledge on adaptation has contributed or not to changing the way adaptation is promoted more systematically. Has all the work, the intelligence on climate finance, different financial instruments, mainstreaming into subnational policy and planning, has it fundamentally changed anything in terms of the financing flows? And how can these NDCs and the national adaptation plans be utilized to empower communities? So I think it's going to be a very rich session today. So without further ado, we will kick off the session Just to explain that we plan to make it very interactive. Our participants are free to put in their questions in the chat boxes as it goes along, but we will have Q&A at various points in the session. So please feel free to either share through text or even at the various points as the session rolls out. But to kick off, I would like to invite, we have someone to inspire us. Her name is Miss Chandra Tripura. She's a founder of the Hill Resource Center in Bangladesh. She's a human rights activist and a social entrepreneur from the Tripura indigenous peoples of the Chittagong Hill Tracts in Bangladesh. She has studied sociology and social policy. She's a professional dancer and choreographer and dedicated to protecting and promoting indigenous culture. So before we sort of go into our distinguished panel, we request Ms. Tripura to give us her view and her individual view based on her experience so far. So over to Chandra.
Thank you so much, Rohini, for such wonderful introduction. Good afternoon and warm greetings to everyone. I'd like to thank all the organizers, especially UNDP and the Asia Pacific Adaptation Forum, for giving me this wonderful opportunity to be a part of the 7th Asia Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Forum. I feel really privileged to share the webinar with some amazing people from different corners of the world. I have grown up in such community where we do worship every single creation of the nature, starting from the trees, especially some spiritual trees, we believe, a river, fire, air, sun, and all the other existing creatures of our Mother Nature. I would love to begin with one of my realization that I felt while walking through the forest in my homeland and a forest of West Kalimantan, Indonesia, a few years back. When all the participants of the cultural exchange visit were following the most handsome 80 years old community leader, who is one of the most strongest persons I have ever met in my life. He was walking so fast and constantly sharing his knowledge about medicinal plants of the community forest to us. When we reached to our destination, I kept asking myself, I still ask myself, why did I spend so many years in school, college, and university? Since I have everything I could learn about the meaning and the genuine purpose of life from our ancestors in our own community forest and staying very close to our roots, my roots. Now in this era, we all know about climate change. We heard about climate change, which is one of the biggest challenges of our time. Indigenous communities, especially in the grassroots level, they have very little knowledge about the term climate change. But those people have been practicing all the adaptation process, which actually now our world experts are suggesting to follow to combat the climate crisis, which is threatening our life, our livelihoods of billions of people across the globe. And every year, frequent natural disasters like cyclone, extreme weather events like drought and flood disrupt food production, deplete fisheries, erode livelihoods. So no country seems to care surface about these global challenges. And the ancient glaciers are disappearing, sea level is rising, global surface temperature is soaring. Indigenous peoples are one of the most vulnerable group of it, who have almost no contribution to global carbon dioxide emission. And I really feel, I think that we are truly, this young generation are truly lucky that we are living in of modern technologies where science is a blessing for humankind. It has made our lives very easy and comfortable, while at the same time is also the biggest reason of global warming. But we have failed to harmonize the science with nature, and we need to rethink about building a sustainable bridge to connect between science and nature. That is where the world needs to embrace indigenous knowledge to make the world a better place for all. I strongly urge all the governments, UN agencies, and other important stakeholders to come forward, recognize indigenous and local community people's knowledge in fighting climate change across the globe. Because the way the government see the development is not the development for the community people, for those indigenous people who are living in the marginalized area in their ancestors' land. What we see in most of indigenous areas, indigenous people's land, corporates, governments, and different kind of agencies who try to implement development in their own way. Um, I suspect they have ever, thought what the local community actually want, how they see the term development. Because to us, the development is nurturing the nature, because the forest we have is the supermarket for us. The forest is the father to us, and we see the Mother Earth as our own mother. So I urge all the stakeholders, all the UN agencies, governments, and especially the young community could come forward to fight these challenges. And I actually would like to conclude with this. It is always the youth power of the time with guidance of elders who will need to bridge science with nature for saving the world from destructive consequences of climate change. Now, it's your choice if you want to be the solution or problem. I have chosen mine. Now choose yours wisely. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chandra Tripura. I think you have actually encapsulated several things at one time, very, very important things. I think the intergenerational cooperation between young people and elder people, the issues of looking at indigenous people's perspectives, but most importantly, I think making sure the voices of people from the ground are represented and they have a chance to speak for themselves and no one else has to speak for them. So thank you so much, because you have actually given us, I think, a very good, you could say, you have set the tone of the conversation. And we hope to continue interacting with you throughout the forum, because the webinar is a kickoff only to the actual forum. So thanks very much. And we're going to hope you stay with us through the rest of the session, and to have your feedback, even in the chat box. But great to hear from you. And with that, we're going to move into a short interaction with all participants, just to know who's there. And I'm going to hand over to Mr. Krib Sitathani, who is a colleague of mine from UNDP. He's the Climate Promise Coordinator for 6 countries in the Asia Pacific. And he's designed sort of interactive exercise for us in a couple of segments. So I hand over to Krib now. Over to you, Krib.
Thank you, Rohini. Thank you, Chandra. And thank you, participant, for joining today. So we're going to stretch our arms and legs a little bit for this interactive engagement. Basically, first, I want you to go to menti.com and enter code 654957. I'll say the code again, 654957. So once you logged in, there'll be a series of questions for you. So these series of questions will be, the first few will be simple. So the first question is, which sector best describe where you belong to? Government, international organization, academia, NGOs, CSO, or last but not least, others. Please feel free to link. And as you can see on screen right now, you can see most of our participants are from international organizations, and second that are from academia. Now, we're getting more participants coming in that have indicated government. So I'll give it a little bit more time since we have about 105 participants and about 40 have responded so far. I'll say it again. The website is www.menti.com. Use the code 654957. Okay. And we're getting a little bit more academia now to 26%, and NGOs at 21. Still predominantly international organization. So as we move forward, we have about 50 participants that responded so far, actually 55 now. So we will move forward to the next question. Okay, this is a little bit more tricky since we've already stretched our legs using Menti. Now, the next question is, do you think the level of community resilience has increased over 20 years since its inception, since its start of adaptation? The responses are multiple choice, yes, no, or I don't know. Last but not least is maybe. If you're not quite sure, but you lean a bit more towards yes, but not quite a no, that's where we want to also incorporate that response. So we capture everybody, as many opinions as possible. Wow, that was quick. So now we are now at about 56 participants. And next, if other participant would also like to join in terms of providing the inputs, you're welcome to. And moving on to the next question. This one is, do you think the pace of community resilience building has kept up with the impacts of climate change? Yes, no, I don't know, or maybe, So just to give us your voice of what you've seen so far in both your own experience and those that you have engaged with. What's your take and how do you see the situation? So mostly everyone has in agreement in terms of saying that it's no, it's not. So in essence, we will go into try to answer some of these questions. What's the pace of community resilience and how we go about it? And I'm handing back over to Rohini.
Thank you very much, Griv. I think those give us some food for thought, and probably if this kind of survey was even held globally, we would get perhaps the results. But perhaps we can look at those later as we go through the next round of interaction as well. So I'd like to now introduce my colleague Yusuke Taishi. He's going to present sort of the beginnings of our resilience outlook for this particular work stream. He is a regional technical advisor on climate change adaptation in the Nature, Climate and Energy team of UNDP. He's UNDP's Bangkok Regional Hub and provides advisory support to countries in this region. In his current role, he oversees a climate change adaptation portfolio of over 300 million, cumulatively in 12 countries in the region for the last decade. Over to you, Yusuke.
Thanks, Rohini. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. The Menti session that we just finished was actually quite fun, wasn't it? So I feel like we should be continuing the Menti session rather than move into my session, but I guess that's the agenda. So I'm going to really walk you through or run you through several slides in the next 7 to 10 minutes to set the stage for the panel discussions that we're going to have towards the second half of this webinar. We have distinguished panelists, so I will sort of set the context for that discussion. Can you move to the first slide, please? Next. Okay, so in this slide, I'm showing the progress that we've made in the adaptation landscape in the last 20 years. And this is specifically in the context of international discourse on climate change. There might have been other progress made in terms of adaptation in other areas, particularly in academia and others. But here we're just showing sort of progress, evolution, and revolution of adaptation over the last 20 years. So in 2001, that was when the concept of adaptation first emerged in the international negotiations. And that was when the concept was pretty much focusing on LDCs. And the focus was very much short-term immediate response, or you could say perhaps coping to climate impacts. And then 4 years later, there was $85 million made available from the funds LDCF, Least Developed Countries Funds, that was established specifically to support countries' NAPAs. I will not go into details of what NAPAs are, but if you are interested, you can Google. But NAPAs were to really support LDCs in responding to adaptation needs. And 2010 was an important year for two reasons. One is because the concept of a national adaptation plan was introduced. And that's when the focus tilted, I wouldn't say shifted entirely, but tilted towards long-term, medium to long-term adaptation needs. And that's one of the reasons why 2010 and emergence of the NAP process was important. The second reason why this was important was there was recognition that adaptation was everyone's business. It's not just for LDCs or developing countries, but it's something that everyone needs to worry about. And then it was in the same year that the Green Climate Fund was established. And then fast forward 9 years, there was a Green Climate Fund mobilized $10 billion of donor funding in the first round. And in 2019, they mobilized the second round of donor funding valued at $9.8 billion. So you can see in this slide that in terms of adaptation financing, we have made tremendous progress over the last 20 years. And also you can see that policy and institutional setups have been established during this period. But it's not just absolute volume of financing alone where we made lots of progress. Can you move to the next slide? This slide and two diagrams show our understanding about climate financing that was also enhanced. In the left-hand side slide, it shows where donor funding comes from and where donor funding goes to. This is our overall climate finance flow. Second diagram on the right-hand side is how climate funding is divided into adaptation fund investments and mitigation investments, as well as cross-cutting investments. Back in 20 years ago, or when I first started working on climate change about 10 years ago, information like this never existed. So we've made tremendous progress in terms of our understanding of climate finance flow as well. So next slide, please. And in the next 2 slides, I want to show you how UNDP's work has progressed as well. We're just using UNDP's work as an example. And the first slide shows our work in a small islands nation of Tuvalu in the Pacific. You can see where the country is in the Pacific Ocean. And this is a country where UNDP is working with the government to build coastal resilience. And in the project, this is financed by Green Climate Funds, we flew an airplane to better understand bathymetry of all the islands in the country. There are 9 islands, all remote, very small. And what you see on the upper right-hand side is the results that we obtained by flying an airplane, taking pictures, using putting the lights onto the ground and capturing the reflection so that we understand very small sort of topographical information, and we can show the elevation of not only the land but also ocean floor in 3D picture like this. And this information is critical in designing effective coastal protection infrastructure, as you can see in the bottom side of the presentation. And it's quite surprising that information like this never existed until last year, actually. So we have made tremendous progress in terms of our understanding of local conditions. Next slide, please. And next slide shows another example from the Philippines on the left-hand side. Here, this map shows the impact of storm surge events, 1 in 50-year events on coastal flooding with different degrees of coastal ecosystems in place. On the upper left-hand side is what the 1 in 50-year floods will inundate today. And when you see lower right-hand side, this is what the flood inundation will be into year 2100 when all ecosystems are degraded. And now we have much better understanding of the quantifiable impacts of different coastal ecosystems on floods impact attenuation. On the right-hand side, this is just schematics on precision farming, and in UNDP's support, especially in the context of agriculture, we are increasingly introducing these ICT-based interventions. So I have shown all these slides to show that we have made tremendous progress in terms of volume of financing, our understanding about financing flows, policy institutional setups, use of sciences in the design and delivery of our adaptation support in the work that UNDP does. So there's no doubt that we've made tremendous progress in the last 20 years, but there's one question that lingers in my head, which is, are we actually moving the needle here? Are we making a wholesale increase in the resilience of local communities, local vulnerable communities? Aren't we introducing all these high-tech science-based interventions only in bubbles where, for example, international donors work? Or is this becoming a sign of a transformation that we're seeing in the society? That's a fundamental question that we would like to ask to our panelists later in the session today. And let me, can you please move to the next slide, please? And I want to share some additional sort of pieces of information here for your sort of food for thought. So this graph shows the same time frame, 20 years, that you saw in the first slide. And you see the blue areas. This represents the damages to infrastructures and economic assets because of the hydrometeorological disasters over the last 20 years. And you see 2 or 3 big spikes over the years. And when you actually look at the longer term trends, you see increasing trends in terms of damages to economic assets because of hydrometeorological disasters. And you see the horizontal red line at about $180 billion. This is the amount of money that's considered to be required to make our society resilient on an annual basis. And when you see red dots at the bottom of the graph, that's the amount of money that's available for adaptation. This is all public-private financing combined. So we're barely meeting perhaps 20% of the required financing for building resilience. But at the same time, I want to also share with you additional pieces of information. That you see green and blue lines in the graph at $48 billion and $49 billion mark. These are the amount of money that the government of Indonesia and the government of Thailand is setting aside as stimulus packages for COVID-19 recovery. So just so that you can sort of compare the amount of money and put this into context. And next slide, please. And now I have sort of changed the proportion of the graph, but it's the same graph. You see the red line, $180 billion mark. And the next line that you see in the middle is the total government expenditures for all Southeast Asian countries, which stands at $500 billion. So this is what the governments are spending in general to run their government. And many of their expenditures are actually relevant for building resilience at the community level, but they are not necessarily captured as adaptation financing. And the other line that you're seeing way above is the total government expenditures on building and repairing infrastructures. This stands at $2.5 trillion, way more than the money that's needed to build resilience. And the question may be, perhaps the money is not an issue. The issue is how we actually make use of money that's already available, but not necessarily used for building resilience at the community level. So these are the kind of questions we would like to throw at the panelists, but also I would like you to think about as you sort of listen to the panel discussion and also in the lead up to the March APAN forum. And can you move to the next slide? And this is the final slide for me. And the big question I would like to ask the panelists is, how do we take community resilience to the next level? So this is the end of my presentation, and thank you very much. I hope this set the context for informative panel discussions to follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yusuke, for that presentation. I think you've really helped us to construct a picture. There are so many pieces to this picture. There's a finance dimension. There is also the state of knowledge dimension. There is the people's dimension, and fundamentally adaptation is about people, and rather it has to be about their adaptive capacity. So there are many dimensions, and there I think you've presented some very important pieces of data and also an interpretation of that. And also I think we can build on this further for the resilience outlook, because we would have to construct a picture on all of those lines, on the finance end, on the knowledge end, and on the people end. And clearly, it looks like we have made progress, certainly. But I think from the audience poll, we've seen, at least even this group thinks it's not as much, or it's not kept apace with the climate challenge. So yes, we had promised that there would be more questions and answers in this session. But with that, I'm very, very pleased that we have been able to marshal a very good group of panelists for this discussion. While we are not able to do it face to face, We hope everyone can stay on properly, and hope everyone's connections stay on so that we can have a very lively discussion. So just to say that this particular session, we have, we're going to take the perspectives of our panel on good practices, priority actions, also not to gloss over any of the challenges, because by no means are the challenges to be minimized. It's also to look at the level of connection between the national level and the local level in terms of resilience building. And we do have we have a panel today. So let me introduce them. They are introduced in the order of speaking. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Professor Salim Haq. He's a director, many of you know him. He's a director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development at ICAD at the Independent University of Bangladesh since 2009. He's a senior fellow at IIED, London. And he is also the senior advisor on locally led action at the Global Center on Adaptation and advisor of the Climate Change Program at BRAC. We then have, I'd just like to check with our organizers. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Then we have Ms. Alicia G. Ilaga. She's the Director for Climate Resilience of the Agriculture Office in the Philippines. Director Ilaga has 26 years of experience in developing, managing, and directing livelihood, agricultural financing, biotechnology, and countryside development programs. She currently serves as Director of the Department of Agriculture's Climate Resilient Agriculture Office and its Balik Provincia Bagon Pagasa program. And she also performs duties as the department's deputy spokesperson. Our next panelist is Ms. Justine Orea da Costa Bello. She's a professional staff at the National Directorate of Climate Change under the Secretary of State for Environment, where she focuses of Timor-Leste, where she focuses on implementing the Montreal Protocol projects, but she also supports Timor-Leste's National Adaptation Plan process. Mr. Osamu Mizuno is a principal fellow of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, IGIS. His past assignments has included working at the Regional Resource Center for Asia and the Pacific, RRCAP at the AIT in Thailand, on the UN's SG's board for water and sanitation, at the Ministry of Environment in Japan, the GEF in the World Bank Regional Environment Center for Central Eastern Europe. He works on promoting environment policies and projects and establishing international cooperation. And lastly, and not to say the least, we have Dr. John Padham. I think he's joining us from a very different time zone. He's Executive Director of Risk, Vulnerability and Adaptation Program, START. Over the last 13 years, he has led or co-led several science capacity development projects and programs in Africa and Asia that engage early career researchers. His work includes strengthening analytical and communication skills for applying climate model projections to adaptation decision-making and advancing understanding of climate change adaptation. So without further ado, I'm going to take hopefully at least 2 rounds of questions which I get to pose, and then we can have a Q&A with using the text box and also the audience chat box. So let me first dive in and pose my first question to Professor Haq. So Professor Haq, looking back over the last decade of building community resilience, what are the main elements that have made community-based adaptation in your view successful? And what are the stubborn challenges that still remain for a long-term scaled-up response? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Rohini, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. Please call me Salim. Professor Haq sounds a bit too fancy for me. I've been working in this field, as you know, for well over a decade, probably 2 decades now. And I work particularly with the most vulnerable communities in the most vulnerable countries, primarily Bangladesh, my country where I'm speaking from, but also the least developed countries in Asia and Africa with whom I've been working for many, many years. And I would say 3 messages have come out of that. Firstly, these vulnerable communities are now facing the impacts of climate change. and they are already dealing with it as best they can with whatever resources and capacities they already have. It's a problem that is no longer just natural impacts of climatic events, but man-made impacts of climate events, which they were not the cause. They're caused by other people on the planet, the richer people on the planet, rich countries and rich people in all countries who are the cause of the problem. But poor people, vulnerable people in the poorest countries are the victims. And therefore, they are having to face this. And the rest of the world, we just heard from Yusuku some interesting information on the level of funding that is available. On the one hand, it looks a lot. On the other hand, it is minuscule compared to the size of the problem. And if we look at what funding is going, almost nothing goes to the local people at the community level. Only 2% of global funding reaches the most vulnerable people across the world. And that is totally inadequate. That is absolutely immoral, unjust, and a failure of governments at the national level and the global system at the global level. And so they have to improve. They have to up their game. They have to accept that they have failed. They have done a very bad job, and they need to do a hell of a lot better jobs going forward. And so the final point I'll make is that it is very possible. The vulnerable communities with whom I've been working are also the ones that are hit by the COVID-19 crisis, particularly slum dwellers in the major cities in Asia and in Africa. And they are already taking actions to deal with the problem themselves because nobody is coming to help them, or very little is coming to help them. And so what do we need to do is to engage with them, learn from them, support them, and not see them as beneficiaries or targets of some top-down efforts by governments or international agencies, but as partners in engaging on the solutions. And they have a lot of solutions of their own, but nobody's listening to them, or nobody's supporting them, or very little support is being done to them. And so we need to get this engagement of the community with higher level decision makers within their own country and internationally much, much better. We need to communicate better. We need to listen to each other. We need to reach out. And I'll end by just saying that's what I do. So we are running a major program on locally led adaptation. We do an annual conference every January. It's called Gobeshona, which is Bangla for research. Usually the last 6 years, it's been very Bangladesh focused, but next year we're making it, from next year, 2021, January, we are making it a global event, a virtual event on locally led adaptation around the world. And I'd invite all of you, all the participants in this seminar, webinar, to engage with us, to share what you're doing. We have to up our game. We are not doing anything nearly enough. And anybody who works on adaptation, in my view, morally, must answer the question, what are you doing to help the most vulnerable? Don't show me fancy maps and constructions. The most vulnerable people, who have you helped and how have you helped them? And show me how you've helped them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Haq. I think you've provided a very important assessment. Also about the disconnect, I think, in a way, between the national and the local levels, or maybe even the global and the local levels. I'm going to turn to Director Ilaga at this point and request Director Ilaga to provide a perspective from government, or at least a perspective from her view about this issue, that when we talk about community resilience, many people think about grassroots NGOs and CSOs working with communities at small scale. At least there's a perception, whether correct or incorrect, of two divided worlds, where on one hand, at the national level, there's progress in technical capacities and policy setups, financial instruments to address the crisis. On the other hand, at the community levels, especially within the most vulnerable communities, that they're sort of working on their own, and it's planned, it's autonomous rather than planned. But we do know that many national governments are doing a lot to build enabling conditions through policies, fiscal transfers, tax incentives. Could you share a few examples of government support that promote resilience at the local level? And what is this coordination between national and local government that is taking place in your country? Over to you, Director Ilaga.
Thank you very much. And that's a very good and important question. I am from the Philippine Department of Agriculture, and I'm happy to announce that we have established a program, Adaptation and Mitigation Initiative in Agriculture, or we fondly call this AMIA. And one of the activities of the program is building of resilient communities. So the DA, Climate Resilient Agriculture Office, that's my office, we coordinate the program, and it is implemented by our AMIA teams from each regional field office. So what we do is farmer groups living within the same area and farming contiguous area were organized in collaboration with the local government agriculture office. And we refer to this as AMIA villages. The farmers and the local agriculture personnel were taught about climate change. They were made to understand the vulnerability of their area to climate risk by actively participating in climate risk assessments. And they also conduct experiments to determine the most suitable and the preferred adaptation technologies for their locality. They also identify their needs and the government services required to facilitate the implementation of the adaptation measures or their projects. So the regional AMIA teams sees to the delivery of integrated support services to the AMIA villages. Resilience in these communities is built with the adoption of adaptation measures, the delivery of support services, and the promotion of crop diversification or multi-commodity production and income diversification. The integrated services that I was talking about include climate information service, credit, crop insurance, market assistance, and technology. In all these activities, the local government units are our partners and we closely collaborate with them because with the devolution, the extension function has been delegated to them. So they are part of the process and they are also part of learning how to build community resiliency.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lag. I think so. So that's sort of very kind of tangible example of, of the role that the national government plays in terms of prioritizing a community resilience program, and also some of the capacities that need to be fostered for communities to kind of lead adaptation on their own, particularly on the knowledge side, and also providing resources really from public funds for this kind of work. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to turn now to our next panelist, Ms. Justine Bello from Timor-Leste. Ms. Bello, you come from a very young country and you're preparing, the Timor-Leste is preparing its national adaptation plan, its first adaptation plan. In your view, how can this plan contribute to community resilience? Just would like to check if Ms. Bello can hear us.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you, Ms. Rohini.
Thank you.
All right. First of all, I'd like to thank UNDP and UNEP for organizing this webinar and for including Timor-Leste in this important discussion. Coming back to your question, for Timor-Leste, the NAP process itself was conceived with two main goals, where it first is to reduce vulnerability to the impacts of climate change by building adaptive capacity and resilience. And secondly, it's to facilitate the integration of climate change adaptation in a manner into relevant new and existing policies, programs, and activities in particular planning processes and strategies within all relevant sectors, where With that being said, the national adaptation will be integrated in sectoral planning. Now, as you'll know that as a small country, and Timor-Leste is very, very vulnerable and has been facing climate change impacts such as sea level rise, cyclones, extreme rainfalls, and landslides, drought. So by building the resilience of the community, NAP will help building the resilience of communities by building adaptive capacity at individual level, especially the community level, as part of the national adaptation plan. When we formulated it's evidence-based data that we collect through what we call the integration vulnerability assessment, where these integrated vulnerability assessment activities have taken place in 36 villages across 13 municipalities of the country. Now, the National Directorate of Climate Change has been undertaking the IVA, we call it the IVA, Integrated Vulnerability Assessment, since 2008. And it's covering already 36 villages with an eventual target of 158 villages from 528 villages in Timor-Leste. Now, those 158 villages are what the villages that we think are more vulnerable to climate change impacts. Now, coming back to what I said, that integrating all sector planning will be integrated in NAP. Now, in Timor-Leste, mostly we have a problem in the government, that we have a problem. We call it ego-sectoral, where each sector feels the ownership of their particular sector. So we want to integrate all sectors into all sectors in this NAP planning, so that I'm so sorry, I gotta mute myself. So so this assessment, we utilize this framework. Sorry, Ms. Rohini, I can't hear you well.
Yeah, no, I think we probably missed 2-3 sentences. Yeah, back to you.
Yeah, so the main objective assessment, the integrated vulnerability assessment, is to gather information and data on climate change impact through the community's observation and experiences, while identifying vulnerable livelihood assets, as well as identifying focused area for adaptation action. So
thank you, Ms. Bello. I think so. You're sort of explaining how the adaptation planning process can also link up to the work on adaptation options in those sort of in villages throughout the country, which is, I think, showing that there is a kind of a top-down and bottom-up interaction that needs to happen between the national planning process and also the local level adaptation planning process, but also some of the options that are being identified at that level. I think that's a very important linkage for even the NAPs to consider moving forward in order to be able to foster bigger investments in community resilience. Now I'm going to turn to Mr. Mizuno, our next panelist. He is from a think tank, and it'll be very good to hear from him in terms of looking at the research and practitioner point of view. So my first question to Mr. Mizuno is, I'm sure the work of a think tank is not without its challenges, and one of them is the balance you need to strike between technical rigor in your research and practical actions that are understandable, applicable, and sustainable. Could you share with us some specific efforts on translating this work to the local community context in developing countries?
Thank you very much. And then first of all, I want to say thank you for the organizers and all the participants to giving this important opportunity to share our thoughts. My institute, IGES, has been working in the science policy interface in Asia and the Pacific for many years. And it is always a challenge, like you indicated, for us to maintain a balance between technical rigor and practical actions. After years of our experience, we came to a conclusion that we need more efforts on the capacity building to accelerate adaptation actions on the ground, especially at the community level, through bridging the gap between science and practical actions. One of the highlights of our recent works in this aspect is the development of participatory watershed land use management, or PWLM methodology. This methodology was developed through a research project at the Santa Rosa sub-watershed of the Philippines, funded by Ministry of the Environment, Japan. And I'm happy to inform you that the results will be soon summarized in a guidebook and become available. So I just will be concentrating more of our future efforts in that direction. But having said so, the efforts of capacity building may be diluted if we do not have good focuses and approaches and give due considerations on ensuring retention and continuity of the built capacity. Therefore, I just plan to prioritize improving decision-making capacity of the communities through integrating science and local knowledge and actions. It includes how they could understand and use the predictions from downscaled climate risk assessment, how to plan and take actions in a progressive or adaptive manner under uncertainty, and how to blend scientific knowledge with local and traditional knowledge and experiences. In doing so, the potential of communities and local people, such as farmers, as their food scientists, will be fully incorporated. We also plan to devote more energies in such areas like how to identify community needs, what incentives and mechanisms to be introduced to ensure informed and meaningful participation, how to trace the progress of effectiveness of climate actions, and how to mainstream their actions with upstream processes and opportunities. Overall, we'll approach for capacity building in a targeted but holistic manner based on the understanding that building community resilience also means working towards enabling community transformation. We have started our capacity building efforts from the understanding that undertaking capacity building is not in the domain of specific single institute. We come to believe that the key is a partnership for linking like-minded institutions at a regional level more strategically and systematically, knowing that there are so many organizations and programs that are already working on capacity building for adaptation in this region. Through such a partnership, we can generate more impacts on the ground through, for example, sharing information of capacity building opportunities, exchanging experts, developing capacity building programs or training modules jointly after the joint mapping exercise of what is missing. Fortunately, Japanese government has launched a new regional initiative called the Asia-Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Information Platform, or APPLAT, with like-minded partners, including IGES last year. And IGES is going to take the lead of the capacity building program under APPLAT. The uniqueness or virtue of the capacity building program under APPLAT is that it aims for coordinated and holistic approach through networking and partnership with the capacity building institutions in Asia to find effective approaches that could be built on the strengths and expertise of the partner institutions and sustained over time. We plan to share our plan and vision through the dedicated web page for AP-PLAT soon. At the same time, we plan to reach out various capacity building institutions in the regions in the coming months to explore the possible approaches to work together on the AP-PLAT for enhancing the capacity of the region as a whole. If time allows, I'm happy to come back to this AP-PLAT and elaborate a bit about it later. So that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mizuno, I think for also sharing with us the importance of these platforms, and especially these upcoming platforms, which could be a facility for capacity building in the long term, which I think would be very useful. I think we'd like to move to our last panelist, which is Dr. Padham. And we'd like to ask you, Dr. Padham, could you share with us one or two concrete examples where universities or local institutions have played an important role in introducing local level actions that are technically robust and that led to a successful action on the ground?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. I'll be speaking through the context of START's work, and START's work is focused on the research end, on developing capacities for researchers. And we found that it's not so much introducing local level actions as fostering the ability of researchers to work with communities to identify and prioritize local actions. And at the local level, a lot of that has focused on innovative ways of communication, such as through community radio programming, community theater, songs, posters, and so forth, and communication that's embedded in appropriate cultural context. So that's one example of some of the work we've done. And I wanted to bring another example of a pending effort, and this is with the Educational Partnerships of Innovation in Communities, or EPIC. This is an effort where START's coming together with UNEP's Global Adaptation Network and EPIC to create opportunities to use the EPIC approach for strengthening the link between local universities and local governments to collaboratively problem solve, and through it strongly engage university students in the process and leverage the power of universities working with local communities. And this model, the approach of this model is to engage students in gaining practical hands-on skills in working with community, creating experiential real-life learning that equips students with useful skills and experiential confidence to work with communities as they enter the workforce. So developing a sense of pracademics alongside academics. We're currently developing a learning opportunity around that. In Asia, we'll be hosting a workshop next year in the around April, May of next year, bringing together pairs of universities and local governments. And I can provide more information on that if you like. So that's a couple of examples, but I'd like to step back from that a little bit and provide a broader context of research into action, research for use. We've got all these terms that we carry around with us. And I think what I've seen from our experience is increasing recognition that it's not just capacity development of science that's needed, but also capacity development to work more effectively with stakeholders and communities. So developing that critical mass of expertise, both from research as well as users of research. And through that process, building the transversal skills that are needed to do transdisciplinary type of engagement with communities. And we are seeing an increase in that, and that's good. And on the other side of it, through NGOs and civil societies, organizations, there's more awareness of the need to bring research in to inform efforts on the ground. But getting to the larger issue of this webinar and thinking about community resilience to the next level, and Salim's challenge that we need to up our game. I think when we think about the research community and capacity development, all these things, and trying to do work with local communities, understanding that resilience is a long-term process, it's deeply contextualized, it's nonlinear, it requires significant engagement of the research community in building trust and a sense of shared purpose with communities. And one of the things we need to look at if we're really going to up our game is to challenge some of the academic culture and incentive structures, as well as the donor culture, which tends oftentimes to work against that kind of long-term engagement and the metrics that are needed to really understand if resilience is being built, if capacities are being built, and if it's being sustained. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Padham, for that perspective, and also, taking up, also giving us examples with, and then stepping back into the broader picture in terms of what what sort of work needs to be undertaken on this issue. I'm actually, we have some very lively, we have some extremely lively questions in the chat box. So I think I'm going to do a bit of a mix in terms of, this next round of questions that we pose. I think there are certainly some very important questions that are coming in the chat box which need to be answered. And there were also certain structured questions that we already had from previous discussions, which we would pose. So what I'm going to do is firstly, turn to maybe Salim. Salim, we've got your permission to not call you Professor Huq. So let me just say, I think that we'd like you to address perhaps two questions very quickly. So the first one being, you've been speaking throughout about the need for the long-term capacity building. Taking a really long-term, sort of 10-year, even longer-term time frame. But what are your views on what's the role of national government in using instruments such as NDCs for this? For fostering this work on locally led action, and what do local governments need to do? How do we build this coalition so that there is this long-term approach? Over to you, Salim.
Yes, thank you very much, Rohini. Excellent question. So there are two scale issues involved here. There is the geographical scale, from the local community to its own surroundings, to its own provincial government, and then its own national government, and then the global world, or even the regional multi-country region within which it is located. So the geographical scaling goes from global to community, or vice versa, community to global. Traditionally, it has been very top-down. Everything is from the global to the local. Climate change is a global problem. Local people didn't know about it. That has changed. Local people now know about it. Now the direction of travel needs to be in the opposite direction. It needs to be from local to global, and we don't have good systems for that. Everybody is willing, the top people like to tell local people what to do. They don't want to listen to what the local people want to tell them to do. We have to change that. So there is a dimension, the geographical dimension, that is extremely important that we have to improve. And most of that is at a national level. So we are talking about national governance. And in every country, whether it's rich or poor, there is a tension between local government and national government. In the United States, in every single country, the national decision makers and the local elected mayor of a little town, he is always struggling against his national government to get more resources, to get them to listen to them. So this local, global, local, national tension, we need to recognize, and we need to find ways to allow a more bottom-up process of communication and listening, which means that the top-down people have to change. They have to accept that they have to change because they're doing it wrong everywhere, every single country. There are some better than others, but all are bad at listening to the local people. The second dimension is the time dimension. As already been noted, climate change is not a cyclone. It's not an immediate impact. Those are disaster management, and countries are dealing with disaster management. But climate change is going to make disaster management even more difficult in the longer term. And we're talking decadal timescales. And on that timescale, from my point of view, the most important investment is in people, in making people adaptive, not making structures adaptive or towns adaptive, but people. And which people? Young people. And Chandra is my, my example. Chandra is the future. Chandra and her colleagues and her friends are the future, the girls and boys in all of our countries. They need to be the ones that are made into the adaptation champions of the future. And within a few years, they will become the leaders of their own country, and they will make their own country an adaptive and resilient country. That's where the future lies, not in building huge structures. Again, I'm not against doing all of that. What I'm saying is that there is a much, much better bang for the buck opportunity in investing in people, particularly young people in every single country in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salim. I think that's a very sort of very clear direction. I think it's a very good segue for me to ask Director Ilaga. I was looking at the questions in the chat box and also our previous discussion. So I think there is an important question that it's very useful to get her perspective on that. Based on this progress, there has been some progress, but also shortcomings that have been observed in the last 20 years. What changes do you think need to be affected in the government system to promote community resilience, Dr. Director Ilaga? And one of the other questions, which is very similar to this question, is, should there be these separate climate change adaptation plans at the community level? Or, should they be integrated into community development plans? I think based on your Philippines experience, it would be good to get a perspective on that from you.
Yeah, so government should really look into institutionalizing the changes that support the building of community resilience, such as the following. Number one, providing localized climate information services and advisories as a regular service of the local government units. So we know what to adapt to if we know the information on the hazards or our climate risk. So we have to deliver this service not only in several municipalities in the Philippines, but in all the municipalities as a regular service of the local government unit. Second is we have to create a permanent office to coordinate the activity at the national level. Like my office is still ad hoc, and we have to make this as a permanent structure. We also have to make a permanent structure at the regional office, like our AMIA teams, so they ensure the continuity of the program, they coordinate with our local government offices, and they integrate the services that are needed at the community level. And going to the plans, I think the local climate change action plans of the local government units should indicate already the agriculture and fishery action plans. I have looked into several action plans of the local government, and they barely mention what are the plans for agriculture. So this should be specified. And also, the timeline for the action plans should go beyond the tenure of the local chief executives and contain action plans that are short term, medium term, and long term.
Thank you very much, Director Ilaga, for that. I think very clear direction on how, how to institutionalize and also what sort of time frame to institutionalize. I'm going to move to actually Mr. Mizuno now. So I think that there are some questions in the chat box, Mr. Mizuno, but perhaps those might be questions that are very specific to the AP Plat, which could be, I think, answered by you separately. But I think in general, perhaps it'd be good to get a question from you on how IDES plans to work with governments and international organizations like the UN to promote actions on the ground.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. First of all, I think that it is important to set up the platform to maintain our conversation collaboration with the interested parties, including UN organizations and other governments and the local communities. In other words, that the ad hoc based approach or communication is not sufficient, and we need to have a standing mechanism to keep communicating with other partners. That is one thing. And we should be, second thing, point I want to make is that we need to be proactive in a sense to develop a partnership with other stream of efforts. In other words, for example, there are significant efforts has been ongoing to develop resilience towards the climate disasters, which is not necessarily taking into account the climate risks, but the huge efforts have been made as Tyson mentioned that for example, for the recovery from these climate disasters. But once they can take into consideration of the climate risks, it will significantly make contributions to the enhancing climate resilience in the community. Therefore, we have to be proactive to develop a kind of a partnership with other stream of efforts like disaster risk management or wider sense, or other efforts to address other SDG challenges. That is my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mizuno, for that. And again, I think speaking about, making sure that it's not ad hoc and that there are platforms existing and new ones that can be used. I'd actually like to turn to Ms. Bello from Timor-Leste. And, we see some questions which are about, sharing lessons from learned from community resilience and how to make it, how to make them sustainable. So, Ms. Bello, I think adaptation in Timor-Leste, I think you have a very good time frame, for the last decade, based on the progress and shortcomings on the adaptation initiatives that have been observed in the last decades in your country. What sort of changes do you think would need to be, made in your government system to make these investments more sustainable or to scale? It's a bit of a difficult question, I think, and it's just to get a sort of a perspective, from you, because your country is still, relatively institutionalizing some of these systems. Over to you, Ms. Bello.
Thank you, Ms. Rohini. Come back to your question. Yeah, it's very true that Timor-Leste is a young country. We've been facing a lot of difficulties. Now, to answer to your question, I think the first thing is, I would say that the word that would put it correct is right man, right place, because having a person who knows how to do the job is very important. I think that's the changes that we as youngsters would like to see in the government in the future. I totally agree with Dr. Salim on investing on the youth for the future, because now if we have the commitment to work towards putting adaptive, increasing adaptive capacity of community in Timor-Leste, then I think that would really help building community resilience. And in addition to, I would like to connect to what Dr. Ilaga said, that if the community knows that they are actually facing some hazards, then they would like to connect to the national level on how they could adapt or how they could increase their resilience. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, that we did our integrated vulnerability assessment, we found out that not many individuals in villages, they know what climate change is. They don't know that, they just know that, oh, we can no longer grow rice, we cannot no longer grow maize because we have drought, but they just know that it's just something normal. Oh, because yeah, so it's not like the main thing that I would like to see is education. I think really touching on increasing their knowledge, awareness on climate change itself, and knowing that we are now on the phase of facing the risk of climate change, then I think we could see some changes there in Timor-Leste. And another thing I would like to see in the future is the coordination and communication within the ministerial level in the country, because before we could reach out to community, we have to have that dynamic of coordination and communication. So we can, as I said, that RNAP, we would like to have an integrated sectoral planning, but to reach that, the main thing is having a political intervention where we could have a very well coordination communication among the ministerial level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bello. I think, I think you've actually given some very clear, suggestions, and also, speaking about some of the challenges that are being faced to do some of this work. So I have to say that, Anna, we have an extremely lively Q&A chat box, and I believe that within our planning for this session, we will not be able to cover all the questions. So what we will do is we will, because some of them are really larger questions about access to finance, our local level communities really getting it. Also about homogenization. I think these are the questions from our colleague from ICIMOD. So we'll probably not be able to cover all the questions, but I hope we can continue that interaction on Slack. Maybe if I can just maybe turn back to our last panelist, John, on just this issue of, the issue of lessons learned, which keeps coming up, and, how to share those. Just wondering if you think that this expertise, the knowledge and expertise in universities and academic institutions, do you think that there is a role for, or I mean, how can these lessons which are being learned by practitioners, be codified or made much more widely accessible? Both scientifically, but also in other ways.
Excellent question. I think one way that these lessons get learned is through vertical dialogues, so shared learning type of dialogues, because there's a tendency to atomize these dialogues. We're going to have the science policy dialogue where scientists talk with policymakers, and then we're going to have a local community event, and the two never meet, and there's not that connectivity that's really needed. And I also think with lessons learned, one of the really important things that keeps emerging again and again is governance and the governance failures. And those kinds of things need to come out, and we need to find ways of having trusted intermediaries to kind of get that message upwards. And I think another way of getting this out is to look at local leaders who have a lot of respect within their community, but also have a lot of respect within the country to be ambassadors of these kinds of messages. And then I think at another level, at a more sort of science level in terms of publications, because that is still a metric for young scientists to get ahead. One of the issues, particularly where we work, and particularly in Africa, is the university systems aren't really set up to do intensive mentoring of students. Oftentimes students go through graduate programs on a part-time basis over many, many years. They don't get the kind of experience to publish. And that's, or the quality of the publications, the impact of the publications, then how to bring them into the global community. So there's a lot of challenges around that. We know how to do it, we know how to fix it, but it does take a lot of resources to get us there. And so I think efforts by the IPCC and IPBES and others to engage scientists from the global south is very much needed. We're getting there, but it's still largely symbolic. I mean, if you look at the IPCC and the amount of chapter authors, particularly from Africa, it's very, very low. And a lot of those come from South Africa. And so we really need, really have some fundamental work to do with the science communities to improve their ability to communicate not only with local communities, and that is improving, but also to the communities of scientists more globally.
Thank you so much, John. I think for that. So I think so. With this, we've actually come to we've completed our Q&A with the panelists. We try to pick up as many questions from the Q&A as possible, but I think we have many more than we can deal with in this session, and we hope to continue the interaction on Slack. So with that, I'm going to hand to Krib and ask him to take us through the interaction before we do a quick closing. Over to Krib.
Hi, thank you to the panelists, and thank you, Rohini. And back to the exercising mode again. So I would have to ask you to log into menti.com again, using the same code as before, 654957, if you haven't already. So can we now go to the Menti? So yes, thank you. So, I see that some of you have already filled in your answer. So please think of 2 words that hold back locally led action on resilience. As you typed in your answer, we will put it on a word cloud so you can kind of see what everyone's thinking. We want short phrases, just 2 words. So it will be, you can keep feeding in this, we'll capture it afterward, and hopefully we can share this as well, so you can see what the consensus of the participants are. You can see that finance is becoming a big, having a lot of mentions, and top-down approaches, political will, motivation, various other items, traditional wisdom, language, lack of motivation. So these are some of the issues that you have brought that we need to do that's really holding us back. So maybe we can try to tackle that through next series of actions that we all take as individually and collectively. So moving on to the next question. This one is a bit tricky in a sense. Please, we want you to share 1 sentence of how this international and national process of the nationally determined contribution as part of the Paris Agreement can really empower local communities. Can you please share your thoughts? We will do a bit of a kind of like a waterfall of people. So the first inclusion is basically inclusiveness. How do we increase that? Coordination. So there are various factors in how this has been inhibited. So we want to see how we can actually accelerate it through your response and see what solution you may offer. So repurposing and proactive spirit of ownership, willingness of national governments to seek views of local communities, which was highlighted by the panelists as well, and community-based training, two-sided engagement, stop working in silos, especially those in various government agencies. I like this one actually. Educate, organize, and mobilize local communities to take control of their adaptation and resilience. I think that's really important. So as more and more being filled out, I will move over to the next question, the last question of our series. So we want to really ask you if you can share with us one idea on what would be most helpful in accelerating local-led community resilience for you, from your perspective. What you think really would accelerate this process to really bring out how resilience and adaptation can be fostered at the local community and also be supported through different other means, whether it become international institutions, CSO, NGOs, or government, or provincial, or other sources. So some of the participants have already submitted: local community building and information sharing, develop planning and fund local adaptation ideas, farmer and community learning groups, spirit of entrepreneurial proaction. LGUs should take it seriously, engage with community members, international phenomenon, crisis, community-based ICAP and BCC for relocating locals from hazard-prone areas, engage with community members. So these are some of the ideas that you have shared with us. What we also want to do with these is essentially try to synthesize them, and maybe we can gather them to provide some sort of ideas and recommendation that we can move forward with. So thank you, and I hand it over back to Rohini.
Thank you so much, Chris. This is really very, very interesting and to see this visually. So we've actually now come to the end of our webinar. We are about a minute ahead of the scheduled time. I think a few things. Firstly, a very big thank you to all the participants in this webinar. I think many have stayed throughout. A very special thank to our distinguished panelists. And also to our inspiration speaker, Chandra. I hope all of you will be in this journey with us together. There are questions unanswered. We'll try to collate them, and maybe we use Slack for a little bit more interaction. There are specific questions for some panelists. We'll try to get a few answers for you if possible after the session. I think there is also the APAN organizers. Really want to thank Babu, Sarah, and Elizabeth and the team for really supporting us, and we hope to continue working with them on this work stream. I think in general, I think like the key questions, I mean, they are questions for us. We didn't expect to answer them, but I think, you know, just to get back to what those were. So there is this issue that adaptation is now center stage in the NDCs, but how this will be leveraged to empower locally led action. I think we need to keep questioning and doing something about it. Dr. Huck has told us also that we need to learn from local people. So, but clearly there are steps being taken in several countries to institutionalize some of that, those mechanisms. So, you know, hopefully we can continue our questioning along that line and make concrete and wider suggestions with a bigger group, even in the main forum. And generally this disconnect between national and local, this disconnect exists. Local level people are autonomously adapting, but there are also ways of leveraging the lessons, and there's considerable experience in doing this, even if it is still fragmented and piecemeal. So I think you know, that's another theme we can pick up. And lastly, the issue of finance is something we will have to look at throughout the APAN. You know, why is access, if there's money, then it is not accessible. And if there is, you know, and how can that be made in a way more accessible so that local people can actually, you know, command or decide over resources and not just, you know, participate in them. So I think with that, I think we will, we come to the end of the webinar. I just want to check if we still have Chandra online. And Chandra, is there one thing that you would like to tell this group? I mean, we do intend to keep engaging you, but is there one thing you'd like to tell this group at this point before we close?
Yeah, thank you, Rohini. I feel really honored to be a part of this process, especially it was my privilege to hear. I really learned a lot of things from the panelists, from all of you, because I can realize the process, how climate change is impacting in our life. But the thing our experts or the world or the corporate organizations, you know, making us, you know, with some kind of definition, making us realize that I can't, some of the time I can't actually, you know, connect with all of those things. But the thing I realize is people can migrate from one place to another if there is a situation. But have we ever thought of those trees. We can take with us with the smallest or small plants with us wherever we go. But is it possible to take the a tree that have been there in our ancestors' life, in our ancestors' lands from centuries? So this kind of things I realize I always think of. So man-made impacts, climate, all kind of problems should be stopped right this moment. And for this, I strongly believe that we, the young generation, can make the change. We are the change, actually. So I always, being a social entrepreneur, so I think that we should, give an example that since we cannot, escape from the tourism thing in this era, so I think we should, give some example that community tourism, the way the community people think the development should give some example, and the government and all the, agencies should accept this way of development. And through the lens the community people see, they should also see through that lens. So I urge, I strongly believe, I'm a very positive person. I always think that, I always say all my folks that never get stuck in any negativity things. So I think if we come forward, if we can, consolidate with strong solidarity, we can fight this, any kind of war we can fight.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that note of optimism and realism as well. I think we all need that optimism and energy. So I think we will see you all at the forum around Slack. And on behalf of my colleagues Yusuke and Crib, Melanie, who's been quietly taking notes, and myself, we now officially close this meeting. And thank you all once again.